Right, here we go. Are you in your zones? Hello everyone, welcome back to part 2 of season 17. I'm all over that. Last time we awarded, my sight has got worse, I think. It's degenerating. I need to regenerate like Romana. Destiny's Eyes was awarded 22.5, and City of Death was awarded an impressive 30. Can anything beat it? We're on to part 2. We are not, for the record here, we're not doing Sharda on this video. We'll be back for a Sharda special. Maybe we could rate all the different... No. Anyway, I'm Paul or P-Bal.
3 months to watch every version.
There'll be another version whilst we're reviewing it. It won't stop. But I am Paul or P-Bal. And I'm joined by...
Hello, I'm still James.
Hi there, Jason here as well.
Why doesn't James have a Mavellan name? Because the Mavellans have all got names, haven't they? Jammel. Jammel, like Cheryl, Jammel. Lieutenant Jammel. Jammel.
Oh, well,
Jammel? Right, anyway, we are halfway through. This is the halfway point. So it is Doctor Who and the Creature from the Pit. Who's kicking off on Cloris? Who's got their pre-script?
Well, I'm going to have a go at this. But James, before I start on this, I am a little disappointed you haven't come in costume to accompany the story, The Creature from the Pit.
I was thinking of going to an army surplus store and just buying a marquee and just putting it over my head, because that's pretty much the costume.
You've just done the intro for the story for me there. Okay, so the Doctor and Romana land on the planet Cloris after receiving a distress call. The mines hold a secret. There is a huge creature in the pit. And looks like the Doctor's about to join them down there. This, obviously, we've talked about the first 2 stories in the season. Destiny, a good start. City of Death, an absolute classic. Feel a little bit like we're back down to earth with a bump in this story. It's, again, it's not one of the highlights of the season for me. I think it's a good level at 4 episodes. Reasonably good guest list in this one. So again, it's the guest cast. I think just the story in this one for me feels a little bit of a struggle. And I have to say, however many times I watch this story, I'm never going to get past the costuming of the creature in the pit. That's not a reference to our lovely June, who I think, again, outdid herself and outshone through this story, as she always does whenever she attacks any of the costumes in a story. But oh my word, what were they thinking? So I'm not going to say any more about the creature just yet, because I'm sure we'll say lots more about it. But not the best of the bunch for me, middle of the road. I'd be interested to hear what the other 2 have to say.
Did you have a poster of the creature next to the Axon Eye on your bedroom wall?
No, there was only one Axon Eye in my bedroom, I'm afraid, and it was the Eye of Axis. I've got to be honest. I mean, however many times you watch it, I don't think you're never ever going to sit there and go, I can take this reasonably seriously when you watch the creature in the pit. And there's that really amazing scene where Tom decides that he wants to try and communicate with the creature. And I do think I did laugh out loud, and I tend to laugh out loud every time I watch it. But oh my word, what were they thinking?
You mean the green protuberance that he tries to speak through?
I can't.
I think were there one of those awful Channel 5 shows when Doctor Who goes terribly wrong, I think it would be one of the clips people pull out where he starts filleting Erato. It's kind of like it's a very unfortunate sort of look on the design. But then if you've got to do 30-foot tall green monster. There's sort of only so many ways. I mean, I probably wouldn't have given it a Willy to talk to, but I think as the crow flies, the size and I appreciate it, and I think that actually works all right, really.
I do wonder whether that wasn't an ad lib from Tom on set, actually.
quite possibly. I know that they asked for modifications to be made, so I think they're like tiny little pincers or arms were added to it because they said it looked too much like just basically a green penis coming out the side of it. And apparently there's an outtake which Jeffrey Belden used to talk about, where apparently he said, "Oh, that's a big one," and everybody started laughing around him, and they were really quite fed up with all the jokes about the creature and everything. But it's a really odd choice, I have to say.
It's meteorological balloons, isn't it?
What's that?
It's meteorological balloons. That's what Arate is made from, I believe.
Yes.
That's one of Lalla's anecdotes. I'll credit her for that one. I don't. I think it's also a very clever wheeze, I think, when you have anything in that situation where you can have a device where the different actors can do the voice. You can save a lot of trouble by just being like, there you go, hold on to that, and Lalla can do the lines, or Tom can do the lines, and that I like that that's quite a clever device. The funny thing, actually, I'm almost overdosing on convention anecdote here, and do you know what, folks? It's good to share. I can remember at a convention once we did with June, my friend Stephen asked what would she dress him in, and she said, and then I thought, well, in for a penny. I thought, well, how about me? It's just sort of a leather head to toe, and I was like, I think she means literally what the huntsman's wearing in this. I think that's the vision of the costume. I know it's the beard or whatever actually things like, anyway, that was the vision. So maybe that should be my cosplay. But I mean, the only misfire, I think I would say, costume wise in this, and it's not actually to the detriment of you, it's and Lalla hates it with a passion, is the Mary Tam frock that she's wearing, because this is obviously the first of the production for season 17, and you can see that there's a sort of consideration that she's probably going to do what Mary was doing, and that doesn't fit anyone. There's a great thing that actually you can swap personality and mix it up more.
Yeah, it was written for Mary, wasn't it? And that this is before the cast change, so she was uncomfortable with it.
Well, Mary says she got on location for Power of Crawl and knew she got to go. So I think this it shouldn't have been writing anything for her for the next year. But yeah, you can sort of tell it. I think that's maybe if you're a casual viewer, you just accept it. But I think as we are probably a little bit more au fait with, especially the different Romanas, and you might say that she looks slightly ill at ease. I think she still looks beautiful, and I mean she looks incredible, but you can sense that sort of it's very much a Romana 1 being played Romana 2, and it doesn't fit within the others' sort of stories for her.
And with it being Lalla's first story that she's come in to film, she's probably still at this stage just trying to sort of try and work out where the nuances of the character for her are going to go as well. She's stepping in, obviously having done the last story of the previous season. She's stepping in, and she's following on from Mary, and she's essentially the same person, just obviously characterized differently because of the regeneration. So yeah, I think she was probably still just finding her feet a little bit in this. But even for a first story, I think Lalla's already shining on screen quite well.
I think moving away from the green protuberance, I want to say
Lalla's not a green protuberance.
No,
offensive,
rude, James. That's rude,
James.
No, the other sort of main villain, if you like. So you've got
Lalla's a villain. What are you trying to say? He's like a character
this
assassination.
Is one after the other.
What are you doing, man?
No, I'm moving on to talk about some of the other some of the other plot. We haven't even talked about anything to do with the plot.
Is he a Mavellan or an internet troll? I need answers, folks.
I can't. I know the answer, but I'm not giving it.
Rude. I was going to talk about Myra Francis as Lady Adasta. Adasta? Is that how you pronounce
Adrasta.
it? Adrasta. Who I think we talked about in City of Death about underplaying the sort of evil character in the story, and here we start to see the flip side of that, where it's very much played up in this instance. And going back, the reason why I wanted to mention this was you were talking about Romana and her first story. You've got a strong female villain, which is, you don't get those very often. So you've got some really there's some quite sort of pithy moments between Romana and Lady Adstra, because what's her name?
Adrasta. Adrasta.
And those two together, they're quite strong characters. I quite like the interplay between them. Tom's obviously thrown down the pit quite early on, and he gets his sort of sidekick in Geoffrey Belden. So, and I quite like that as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I never think that I particularly like Creature from the Pit until I watch it, and then we call it The Pit, and I think Myra is so beautifully colourful in this, and and you can tell as well when someone's got that much attack and has got that much presence that Tom is brought in line with it, and I think you can really see that there's a definite sort of interplay there, because they're both pitbull, and she is very strong, and again I think it's the right level of over that it needs to be. I mean, it's quite brutal. There's the bit where she smacks Romana across the face, and she goes, "Don't answer me back, darling." It's kind of like, probably not with a cockney thing, but she backslaps it, and it's incredible. It's a very striking performance. She was a lovely lady as well. I'll put that in there as well. But striking performance, and I think full credit. Also, when your sidekick is Eileen Way, I mean, you're onto a winner, aren't you? I mean, you can't fail, can you?
Old mother.
Oh, the old mother. You definitely can't fail. And she's absolutely on song during this story, and just plays the role so perfectly. And obviously, I'm a big old mother fan back from the Unearthly Child, so she's always going to be a winner for me whenever she's in Doctor Who.
And I tweeted this week, but it is the pull-out quote. Here's another 6 inches to your collection, old man. And she's, why isn't that on T-shirts? With all the terrible branding that they put out for Forbidden Planet, why haven't we got that with a picture of Madame Corella? Come on, that's what we want. The weakest part, I think, for me in this story is the bandits. I don't like the pitching of it. They're a bit. BBC is going to be a bit of an odd thing for me to say. It just feels a bit ill at ease with the tone of the rest of it.
Yeah. It's almost a little bit pantomimey, I think.
That's what I was thinking. It's like the comic relief in a panto, where you've got this sort of bungling group of people who are pretty much there just to do the filler in between the other scenes, and then fulfill something at the finale. And that's kind of how I felt about them. I get the whole metal is precious, and that obviously sets the scene for the bigger storyline about why the ambassador's gone to the planet to come out of a trade deal. But it kind of they sort of, it is very panto. They kind of sneak in, stage left, we'll get the metal, and then they sneak off again, and then you're back to the main plot. And it doesn't really add anything for me at all.
It's our first outing for David Briley as K9, though.
It is, yeah.
And it's interesting because it is a different take on K. You would think with the prop and it just being scripted as K9, that it would be quite a sort of generic. That sounds terrible. You'd think it would just follow, straight onward. But it's a different canine. I might err on him being a little bit more camp somehow.
It's quite sassy later on when he's been dismantled, and there is a little bit of humour there, and it's nice. It's nice to see Canine part of the story, although he gets sort of taken out by the sort of wolf weed things, and then he gets dismantled because he's made of metal. But it's good to see Canine becoming part of the story in this one, whereas he was missing in one episode and barely seen in the previous one. So it's good to have Canine back.
And agree, it is more than just a voice change here. And I think you see a characterization change in the way that Canine's used. I mean, obviously, Canine's always a little bit of a throwaway in stories, and either the scripts have the character Canine in it, or they don't, and they come up with inventive ways, particularly as we move into season 18, they come up with really inventive ways to try and essentially write poor old Canine out of pretty much as many scripts as they possibly can. But I initially, I think, thinking back to the day, I would never have noticed that there'd been a change in the actor voicing this. But I was very conscious this time out watching this story and the following stories that came through. And initially I felt I'm not quite as sure, because I'm so used to hearing John's interpretation of Canine. But I actually did warm to this as on the rewatches of these three. And I've not seen these, the next three stories, actually. I've not seen these in quite some time. So to sit and watch them almost with a bit of a fresh eye for me, I think he adds a certain dimension, and it sits very well alongside John Leeson's portrayal.
Point the dog against the wall. That's one of my favourite lines. I love that. I love all that. It's terrible, isn't it? But yeah, it's a different take. I would still say John's obviously he's done it so much more, but it's a different take on it, and I think it's absolutely fine. It's a different spin for the character. Do we have any stato facts waiting in the wings here?
A couple. So Maurice Barry, who directed Moonbase and Tomb of the Cybermen, he actually is credited as an actor in this.
Oh, he is. He's not credited.
He is an actor in this. He is an actor in this. Yeah.
He goes in the pit. I think Wendy would have merrily pushed him into a pit.
Terry Walsh, who was the stuntman for Pertwee and for Baker, he's also, it's a character in this as well. So this is, I think, the last story.
He stood next to Maurice Barry in the same scene. they're both the experts on the shell.
Have you watched it, James?
I have watched it.
Hang on, don't you throw that stone, Clifford. Tell me what scene the two of them appear in then. Tell me about the scene that Maurice and Terry do then.
I can't pinpoint it.
Oh, you can't pinpoint it. I would say maybe Lady Adrasta's got TV's Doctor Who, and she's asking him about the egg, and the two experts come in, and she tells Maurice Barry that he's got it wrong. He's got to be thrown in the pit. Maybe that's the scene.
I couldn't help but just throw that back at James, because I always get it thrown at me. So
I mean, I have to say on this one, it's not that I didn't enjoy the story, but when I was doing my research for it, I ended up doing a lot more research on Myra Francis's career. I was just like, oh wow, than the actual story itself. So if you want some Myra Francis facts that are not related to this story, I can furnish you with those. But
what I would say then as a shout out on Myra Francis in her later life devoted much of her time to a charity called All Dogs Matter. So she quite often couldn't come to events or whatever because her husband was acting, and she had to look after the dogs because they would take in abandoned dogs, and they would look after them until they could be rehomed. So check out the charity. We've done a few collections for them, and it's a great charity to support. It's called All Dogs Matter. And she was a huge part of that.
didn't she do a film, or there was something that she did for it as well? No, I was reading about that. But yeah, she's an amazing woman who she passed away earlier on this year, didn't she? So rather sadly. Indeed.
Christopher Barry's last directorial contribution to Doctor Who as well, and not an easy.
Apart from downtime.
Yeah. televisual, but not one of the easiest stories for him to end on, because there were certainly some differences of opinion during filming from both Tom and Lalla, as the story goes. And of course, there were lots and lots of technical difficulties in trying to realize some of these scenes as well. No doubt Arato being one of the many things that they had technical difficulties trying to visualize. So interesting that it's his last story. Obviously, a massive contributor to our Doctor Who series over the years. Maybe not the best stories for him to go out on. No, but and in all seriousness, this is the start of some real behind the scenes changes, because we start to see more of that as we go through the next couple of stories where people have decided to now leave. And there were some quite a few disagreements behind the scenes starting.
Who's left on The Creature from the Pit?
No one at this point. I'm talking about later on.
This is the first story of the production block. It's fine. Still happy. He's doing the fake fact thing now. This is fake news now. This is the Mavellan troll is fake newsing us. That's what this is.
Watch out! It might have been in Thunderbirds.
Erato's first appearance was in a Lady Penelope annual, I think. Yeah. Actually, if we check back. We haven't talked about Jeffrey Bales, actually. Jeffrey, he's Catweasel to most people, I suppose, and it's probably a slightly Catweasel performance, but it's a really charming, humorous performance, and it really brightens things up when he's in it. Often
quoted in the earlier years of Doctor Who as a potential Doctor Who himself.
Yes, it's interesting because he's potential Doctor Who, and obviously we're coming up to Graham Crowton, who was also almost a fourth Doctor, I suppose. That was you can look at Gas, the pair of you, but it depends whether you like fun or not. I mean,
we will find out when we get there.
Yeah.
But Jeffrey, it's a sweet performance. Again, it's that. I think the only thing that I find I don't really like about this is the bandits bit. And again, it's no disrespect to the people playing the part. The pitching seems a bit strange, and I wonder where that stands. Whether it's directorially should have been, we need this as the level, and this is where we're at.
Agree. I think the bit for me that doesn't necessarily work so well, I think, is the ending to this story. I think the conclusion, just almost a little bit too far-fetched, and obviously it's not visually realised terribly well, where they try and sort of wrap the sort of asteroid up in the
aluminium
metal
shell or whatever it is around the planet.
It just the whole thing seems a tad too ambitious and a tad too far-fetched. So you go from the one extreme of the direction of the sort of bandits not being potentially in keeping with the sort of feel for the story, to this sort of overall conclusion that takes it completely away from the planet, and you've just got special effects to conclude. I just don't know. It just doesn't feel as if it's sitting well in this story.
It's a draft trading agreement. Lots of little humour there. I love his little. There's lots of jokes about astrology. There's lots of jokes about not being able to tell the future and stuff like that. It's funny.
I do love the big scroll with the trade agreement. It's kind of it did make me chuckle thinking that could be an early Brexit scroll there.
You're getting political, and he's trolling Doctor Who stars. It's all going off in season 17, isn't it?
Well, we might as well join in the fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are we going to go for a score on Doctor Who and the Creature from the Pit?
Oh yeah, I think so.
Okay. Which one of you ladies wants to go first then?
Go on, Jason.
No, after you, he said, lady. I think with that wig, you're well in there for this.
Okay, so following the previous story, which was fantastic, we're kind of quite literally climbing into the pit with this one. It's got a few little things that I like about it, but like you say, I find part of the story completely incoherent. The scavengers and things like that. Despite some nice performances, it doesn't get above a 6.5 from me.
I love all the fractions. They always make it so much happier for me to total.
We know you like them, so that's why I think we throw them in a little more often than we should do. Okay, Creature from the Pit. I think a lot James what just said probably sums it up for me. I think there's a good story underneath this. It just fails to deliver in a couple of places for me. The Arato creature. I think as I've said, the bandits are not quite. The story jars ever so slightly there, and the ending, as I've said, is quite. I don't know. Just feels a little bit tacked on. It feels a little bit too ambitious for the story. However, bringing it back, you've got some terrific guest artists playing along here, particularly Jeffrey Belden and Eileen Way coming in, and Mara Francis. So, you know, there's lots of good about this story. It's not the worst, not the best. And I'm going to be pitching Creature from the Pit in at 5.5.
5.5?
5.5.
I'm going to say you're tight, and it might be the first time you've heard that. Okay, I think two comedy bits that I should have mentioned here that I really like as well are when they say that they're in the place of death. Why is it called that? Anyone who's found he is put to death. Okay, it's you either get that or you don't. And when he goes down the pit and he has to learn how to do the climbing, and it's in Tibetan, so he gets how to learn Tibetan. Okay. So yes, I don't think I like it as much as I could like it or should like it. But there is a lot more in it that I like than I think I do when I go to watch it. And I think if only for the magic of Myra, Eileen, and Jeffrey, I give The Creature from the Pit 7.
Oh, that's very good.
It's a solid 7, as I think they say in the trade.
It is indeed a solid 7, yes.
Which brings The Creature from the Pit out at 19, which is also my playing age.
Is there a range in there at all? 19 to somewhere else?
Yeah, 19 to 30, which was the score we gave the last story. So we move onwards and upwards, I feel sure, as we head for the Nightmare of Eden. Right, who's got a pre-scripted intro for this one?
Oh, I think it's me. Oh, what a story to start on. An intergalactic car crash that ends up with a drug smuggling ring is what I've put. Or
that's exactly the same as I've got.
Or I put hashtag just say no, because I was just reminded of Great Chill when I was watching this. Where do I start with this? So we've got essentially two spacecrafts that have somehow managed to merge together because they came out of hyperdrive or whatever at the same time. Whilst the Dr. Romana and K9 are trying to disentangle them, you have this sort of drug addiction storyline that's going on as well. Someone on board one of the ships is smuggling drugs, and they don't know how the drugs are getting out or where they come from. And the Doctor and Romana get involved in the sort of plot to try and find that out. And it, on the one hand, there's a serious side to it. And I know that a lot of conversations took place around some of the original ideas behind this story, because Lalla in particular didn't want they were going to call the drug something quite
Zip.
sort of zip, that's it, something quite sort of fresh and modern, and she didn't want it to appeal to children. It was very much like, there's a serious message here that the drugs are bad, we can't give it a trendy name, and I get all of that. I struggle with this story in other areas, some in performance, but also in the idea of the mandrills themselves visually, and what happens to them when they die. So whenever I watch this, I'm always hoping that I'm going to find something that I'm going to go, oh yeah, oh, but I do have to say I struggle with this story. Oh,
I thought Jason was about to speak. He must have just moved.
I think I might have just moved. I think it is again. It's another difficult. They're tackling a subject here, especially with drug stuff. I think that they're tackling a challenging story. However, for me, there's plenty of room in Doctor Who for a good old-fashioned sort of mystery suspense investigation type script, which is essentially what this becomes, because everybody's on board the liner. The liner's crashed with the other ship, or crashed or merged. You've got some sort of monsters roaming the sort of ship that you don't know why, you don't know what for. You've got all the sort of the sort of paying passengers. This story could actually have had quite a lot of jeopardy, could have had quite a lot of twists and turns, could have had quite a lot of energy. But unfortunately, it falls just a little bit flat and doesn't quite hit the mark on any of those. I think underneath this, there's actually a decent story. Unfortunately, the direction of the story is not very well handled, particularly, it's well recognized that Alan Bromley walked out and quit halfway through the productions. This was a very, very troubled production. And, I think the crew were all sporting T-shirts at the end of this story. When they got to the end of it, also we survived the Nightmare on Eden, because I think it was actually quite a nightmare story for them to film. But take that to one side, I think there is a reasonable script under here, unfortunately, not realized as well as I think it could have been.
Yeah, and I think this is the story that I alluded to earlier. It's Bob Baker's first solo, because usually Bob and Dave. And actually, it's a very dark story. And I think if it were played, maybe the way it would have been played if it was made 2 years before, I think people would maybe have a bit more respect for it, because actually it's incredibly dark. You get to see the effects of the drugs on people. You get to see the detrimental effect on the captain and the captain's mate. You see that this Vraxoid actually does destroy lives. It's addictive. It's destructive. So the message is very, very clear there. Even down to the sort of dubious notion that it comes from actually. The creatures themselves aren't the bad guys in this. It's the guys that want to use the creatures to make them into drugs. There's a lot of concepts going on here. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. The thing that really strikes me watching this one, about the scene that I think really strikes me as being, it should be one of the horror moments, is when the mandrills go into the passenger area and massacre the passengers. It should be horrific that these creatures are ripping through the passengers. But you have that woman going, and it looks like she's hugging a guy she didn't want to meet from Tinder. She's grimacing in a really strange way, and because of that, you then don't feel like there's a peril there, because you should have something really brutally horrible. But then, when David Dacre says, "What's the problem? They're only economy class," that should cut, because you've seen people slaughtered by these creatures. Slightly again design. I like the mandrels. I like the look of them. The flip side of that is that they look slightly like a Muppet, so they're quite cute. There's a sort of, I'd love to hug a mandrel. I mean, that's another t-shirt. I'd love to hug a mandrel. They're really cute. They are sweet. And especially because there's a little mandrel, and they're sweet. And they should sort of have an edge to them that makes them a little bit more disgusting or a bit more sort of scary. And I think that the big green eyes and the arms, they look quite sweet, and so it's hard to find a fear from them. And the other sort of costume element to it is that when they do come to kill someone, they sort of bat them a little bit. It's hard to quite. They haven't got big claws. They should have claws, and they should be, because when he comes out of the sort of what we call it when the ships are divided, but he comes out and he's been savaged. He's got scratch marks, and again, Della's boyfriend, he's got scratch. So the implication is that when you're attacked by a mandrel, they've savaged you and scratched you. But when they come out with their big conical arms, they're what are they doing? I
mean, in today's Who, it probably would be CGI, and I'd like to see there being a transition from the cute sort of version to a more fierce version, whether the eyes go or the face changes or the claws come out. But obviously with restrictions back then with the costumes, it was probably not possible. But you kind of want them to go from that cute, lovable sort of mandrel to a more fierce and more aggressive. But there isn't really, because they kind of just bumble along, and then they get hold of people and injure them or kill them. So I think, although the design is quite memorable, I'm just not quite sure that it is as scary as it needs to be.
I also wonder whether TV's Bob Baker kept watching Doctor Who after the Three Doctors were shown and saw any of Carnival of the Monsters, because the miniscope isn't a million miles away from the CT machine, is it?
No. And there's a brilliant moment where Tom, where he sort of turns around and goes, "I don't like this." Basically, he's very pointed about it, saying, so these people are, it's all trapped inside, is it? And he's quite pointed about the fact that he really doesn't like the idea of the machine, which I think is quite nice. Although they don't call it a miniscope or whatever, it is essentially the same kind of technology.
And at the very end, when they're carted off as well, and he doesn't look at him, that's a very strong. Given all my arms, my legs, my everything, and the other things that have preceded that moment, that's a very dramatic thing that he won't even look them in the eye when he said. Because I think Louis Fiander, you'll either like his performance in this, or you won't like it, and I think it's fun. I think it's a good colour. He's just skirting that edge.
For me, he's over the edge. But when I was looking at sort of reading about this episode, he actually spoke to Tom Baker about the accent, and his idea was that he wanted to do something futuristic but with an accent. And again, I'm going to say it's. If I had my Marmite jar, Jason, this would be the point to wave it, because I think the accent, you either do like it or you find it irritating. And for me, I found it irritating, I have to say.
I mean, yeah. Jeffrey Bateman, the other villain of the piece, has had an incredible career, and Nightmare is not something he particularly likes to talk about, I don't think. So again, having Jeffrey does a great performance. David Dacre does a really good performance. And Peter Craze as well. I think, and come on, Jeffrey Hinsliff. I think they're great as the officers, what they call.
Yes, the security guards, or the security police, essentially.
Are they what's it? Oh God, no, I know. Bales. Sugar is so late. My mind's going. Import people, aren't they? They're against.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, but they're great. So there are a lot of great performances. Jennifer Lonsdale, I think, is given what Jennifer Lonsdale does, like in That's My Boy and everything else. And I think, one of my favourite Doctor Who shootings where she holds her her liver and gets shot in the chest, or like the visual effect is not hitting her where she's been shot. And there's a very sort of slow where he points at her and she could, just stand there while he gets shot. But it's nice, it's bright. I think it doesn't sag. I think it's got a pace to it. I think some of the design though I'm not so keen on. There's that big because you always have that big sign next to the lift. There's a massive big yellow thing that says alarm. Because you just need to do that. Every now and then, as the alarm, it's the big yellow thing on the wall that says alarm. If you're going to be attacked by a mandrill.
There's a point where
it does feel to be a lot of.
Oh, go on. Sorry. I
was going to say there does feel to be a lot of corridors, a lot of chasing around corridors, and then you get that bit where Tom's chasing the lift up and down the same flight of stairs as you're sort of scrolling around. So again, I think the restrictions of what the set was allowing. But unfortunately, there just are a lot of stairs. I agree a lot with what you said about the guest cast that you've got there. There's been a great cast in this. Everyone's playing to their strengths in some degree. I'm on the side of liking the character of Triss. Actually, I think it's played reasonably well.
There's a scene where K9 is like lasering a panel, and you can see there's a hand holding the panel up ready to drop, and it finishes. It's just little things like that, and you go, "Oh, this is classic Doctor Who and the wobbly sets."
In episode 1, there's that bit as well where they haven't quite worked out, because the security officer's talking to David Dagan, and he's looking to camera, and it's really strange because it's kind of like. It doesn't then happen. It's kind of like, are you doing to camera because it goes or not? And it just feels like nobody's really given the trouble with the direction. I can see that's probably indicative of that. I mean, it's incredible that it happened. I do think that the stresses of it must have been huge, really, because Doctor was pressure laden anyway. I'd also maybe Tom at this point is getting bigger, he's getting more, because I know the gist was that Graham wanted Tom to go the year before. So within that, they said, no, Tom, we've got to keep Tom because Tom is Doctor Who. And I suppose when the BBC are saying that, there's a huge amount of power that comes with that. Then how do you direct someone that's got that amount of power? So it's difficult. And I suppose that's wherein you get the next season where they've sort of taken all the fun out of it.
Yeah. They could tail him to a degree in the next season. In this season, he's still being given the freedoms to effectively go with whatever he wants to, it feels like, in any story. So he's objecting more to the direction that he's taking in numerous stories. He's, I think, putting some of his own humor in there, but he is the driving force behind Doctor Who at this point. And I think I get the feeling in the time that Graham Williams was part of the show, I'm sure they got on very well, but I'm not entirely sure Graham knew quite how to curtail Tom, and that's why perhaps potentially with the support of the BBC, Tom's sort of control over the show, if you like, grows as it goes through these 2 seasons in particular, season 16 and season 17. But
on the flip side of that, Tom is mesmeric. He's absolutely incredible. Even when he's so over, he's incredible. And there's even with the comedy, there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of attack for it. And I think even with a script, if the script isn't good enough, he raises it up. And I think you can sort of see that the legendary stories of him throwing and saying, whip it shit, or throwing the scripts about in the rehearsal room, that he probably was angry because he knew how much it took to lift this stuff. And if someone hadn't put enough into it, or it wasn't funny enough, or wasn't clever enough, that he's going to react to that because he knows he's batting at the level where he wants to be able to fire it out.
But then you see the flip side of that is you've got to have a strong cast up against him that's going to complement that, because you can tell, you're right, he does raise it, but you've got to have people around him to raise it equally. Otherwise, it just becomes, this is a Tom Baker performance rather than a ensemble piece, like we saw in City of Death, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily anyone in this that he's backing against. I think everyone is sort of stepped back a bit from him. I don't see a great. There isn't a Tom and Myra situation. There isn't someone, I think, on the level footing. It does feel like he's very much running the show on this particular story. I'd agree with if that's what you mean, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. You have to get that, and this story doesn't have that, and there are people that he's worked with that you can see he respects, and he we've talked about this in other stories where you can see that his performance reflects their performance, and then there are other people that come in like Myra who are notching it up to match him, and in this there really isn't anything like that,
even with Lewis's accent,
even with the weird accent.
I think then. Are we?
One
he's got a fact. He's got a fact.
One stat. Some of the clips are actually from the Terra Nova from Space 1999. They were reusing, so that when they did the outside shot.
Sure.
Yes, I am sure.
They're not models from.
No, they're not models. Well, it's a clip that was already in Space 1999.
Are you sure? Are you sure they're not models from Space 1999? I couldn't imagine them paying for a clip from Space 1999.
Don't know. That's what I read.
I don't know where you're hanging on the dark web. I don't know what is this site? Is it like the dark web version of Gallifrey Base? Is that what this is?
Oh no.
Troll Gallifrey Base all the time.
Well, yes, we've heard some of the trolley opinions. Thank you. Dread to think what avatar you're hiding behind on Gallifrey Base. Okay, let's get some scores on Doctor Who and the Nightmare of Eden before I sack one of you halfway through.
No sackings required here. I think I'll just repeat a little bit of what I've said. I think underneath this, there's a very very good script under here. Unfortunately, the production itself lets itself down through its direction, and I think through some of the visual realization of some of the elements of the story in this case. So the model shots, the mandrels, and just the general sort of set. I don't think of the ship is well realized. But like I said, good story sitting underneath there. I think we've got a reasonably strong guest cast here, but it's not one of the season highlights. I think it's a good middle of the road story, and I'd be pitching The Nightmare of Eden in at 5.5.
See, whenever you say middle of the road, it could be any number.
Is this a temporal orbit? I'm sure that's what you gave the last one.
Indeed, and it's exactly the same score I'm giving it this time, 5.5.
James, where are you at on Doctor Who and the Nightmare of Eden?
Well, I am going to be slightly less generous than that, and I really did go middle of the road, square on 5.
Gosh.
It's not a particularly good one for me.
Okay. You mean Joe Mary's? I think it's quite fun. I think it's got a great pace to it. I think there's a lot of nice performances in it. I like the look of the mandrels. Some of the corridors are showing signs of wear. I like the concept. I think the concept is incredibly dark. I think it's actually quite underrated for what it is. I gave Nightmare of Eden 7. Which it's strange. It's what I gave the last story, but 7. I think it's great. I think it's above average, and I think it's got a lot of punch to it.
I think it's a story I'd certainly like to see if that had been remade, or you could remake it again and take that script and just beef it up and actually do what I think was realistically it should have had done to it the first time around. I certainly think it would have been one of the season's better offerings for me.
I believe there's new CGI, I think, isn't there, on the the Blu-ray. They've sorted the ships out, I think.
Did they get those? Well, did they get that clip from Space 1999? Do you think?
And they probably did. It's the BBC go-to for any of these things. If Thunderbirds are sold out, they'll use a Space 1999 clip. James is a fully paid-up member of Fanderson, isn't he? Anyway, we head towards the series finale, and it's the last chance for something to beat the City of Death, and it is Doctor Who and the Horns of Nimon. Who is going to start us on Doctor Who? And Janet Ellis from Blue Peter in Doctor Who.
Jason, I believe it's you.
It's not, is it? Okay, I was going to.
Oh no! Quick, left to right, left to right, left to right.
Indeed, we've forgotten how we were pitched to start with here. Okay, so the Horns of Nimon. We've got up to. Well, we weren't entirely sure that this would be the end of our season. It's brought to a premature end due to some strikes at the BBC. So our season finale is in fact the Horns of Nimon. And the planet Skonos has a secret at the heart of its power complex. The Nimon intend to invade, and realistically, there's only the Doctor and a lot of overacting that's going to save the day, I think, a little bit in this one. Okay.
Tom Baker overacts in this. What are you saying?
I am not suggesting that at all, and I think you know where.
Stop the song. It's not the Doctor that saves the day in this one. It's Romana that's taken the lead here. Anyway.
Okay, so firstly, I'm gonna put my cards on the table. I am not in the opinion that this is the worst Doctor Who story ever. I actually think that this story has quite a good story plot going on underneath it. I think there's some interesting concepts at play. I think there's actually a reasonably good cast list that sits alongside this. And, you know, God bless him, Graham Crowden, a Soul Deed. I think he brings his own interpretation to the role of the person who's in charge of what he's in charge of. You know, he's got access to the legendary Nimon, and, you know, he's the man with the power, but he's not the man with the power. Acting aside, I think this story has got quite a number of facets that I like about it. The Nimon are quite interesting creatures, quite sort of, we don't really get to see a huge amount of them outside of the sort of balletic movements and the high heeled shoes. But I think, again, they've been realized in a slightly different way. There's a definite evil and a definite menace underneath there. Yeah, for me, good all-round story.
So Paul, your score?
Sorry, I think I'm in the studio with Sharda. I've been cancelled. I'm like, they put the locks on. The funny thing about the Nimon costume is the original notion was that the Nimons were people dressed up as bulls, wasn't it? So the costume was designed with the intent that it was meant to be someone looking like they were dressed like a bull before they decide actually no, they are bulls. But watching it could be the case that they are still people that are dressed up like bulls. They might be like the Ice Warrior with a big helmet on. So underneath there could be some very svelte people in I don't know, clog heels and tights. That might just be how they invade places.
Yeah.
I like the design. I'm putting the card straight on the table here. I think Graham Crowden is incredible. I think he's iconic, and I think he knows exactly where he's going with this. And I think if anyone was going to be doing it any other way, I don't think you could pull this story through. He's got the pitch and the measure of it entirely. And I think on the complete sort of flip side of that, I think Michael Osborne, huge kudos to him, because he's playing it so deadpan that allows that as an interaction. I think if he were doing a comedy turn, it would fall flat. But I think you can have a big performance like Graham, as long as everyone isn't like, I mean, who could be? Incredible. I love it. One of my absolute favorite, and I wish I either used it more or was causing. But I love it when he calls Romana, "You meddlesome little hussy." Why? Why don't people use that more often? It's, you meddlesome little hussy. I'm going to use that. That's my thing for the year. I'm sure at some point I'll have to say that to Jason, but I should remember that as a term.
The other one I love is Malcolm Terrace when he addresses all the sort of young people. And he goes, "Weakling scum," just which was, again, it was ad libbed. There were some great moments in this. I mean, I absolutely echo what you said. Graham's performance is, for me, the standout thing of this entire story. I do like the story. I think the story is actually reasonable. But this goes back to what we were just saying about the previous story. There was no one really playing up to Tom or matching Tom. And then you have this powerhouse of and I don't even think you could say it's over the top, because it's more than over the top. It just jumps out at you. Every scene he's in, he seems to steal it. Some of the scenes, without even saying anything, it's just this like facial expression. The death scene where he's, he didn't realize that it was the real take, and so he was laughing during it. He did a sort of manic laugh and then sort of like like this. And when they said cut, he was like, "Oh, I didn't realize this was you were filming it," and they were like, "No, keep it in," because it's just, this performance is just amazing throughout. The energy he brings, even when he's on his own. There's that scene where he sort of he goes into the sort of complex, and he's going, "Lord Nimon, Lord Nimon," like this. Even that, I'm just sat there going, I could watch just him on screen the whole of this story. That it would be, he is absolutely brilliant.
And I think it's probably Lalla's finest hour as Romana. I mean, it's her story. TV's Doctor Who is sort of dicking about and fiddling with the TARDIS, so she goes and has the adventure without him. He joins in later on, but I mean, it is her story, and she's so in command of it, and she gives a great performance. I love, actually, it's Solly's death scene. It's the post meddlesome hussy. She goes for him, and she absolutely, and it's incredible because even stature and stuff, she holds it, and she brings him down. She absolutely brings him down just by holding her own. And it's such a strong scene. It's such an incredible performance, and it's all common. But I love the costume. I love her. It's kind of weird because he's the ball hunting. I love that. Again, that's one of my. If I'm going to do a cosplay, I really want to do that. Get me the job person. I'm all over that. It is so incredible, and I think it's interesting because Horns and Nimon is often a story that people say is one of the worst, and I can't see why. I suppose I can see that people, if you don't like Graham Crowden, you're screwed. I mean, if you don't like what he does, and I mean that's what Graham does. I mean, if you watch him, that's what he's going to do. If you don't like that, I suppose you're going to struggle to like this story. But it's powerful, and I like it. Simon Gibbs Kent, he was the sort of chap of the era, wasn't he? And it's nice to see him in Who. Terrible sort of sad story that sort of follows with that. But and Janet Ellis, I mean, it's Blue Peter and Doctor Who. I mean, there's so much to kind of take and to love with this. You have to be quite miserly not to enjoy it. Apologies at home.
There's the whole Greek mythology aspect to it as well. Like you say, the sort of Nimon is supposed to be kind of minotaurs. There's a lot of reflection in the names are quite similar to Greek mythology names. So you've got the labyrinth with the Nimon on it. And I think they are, like you were talking about the platform boots, this like 10-inch platform boots that they're standing on and they do look imposing, especially when you've got the younger cast members who are with Romana, and obviously Lalla's quite short as well. So they look really imposing over them, and I think they are actually quite, for me, I think they're a quite realised costume. I quite like that. I think they look the part. I mean, there's some great. I wrote down here about the costumes because there's some great costumes, and Graham Crowell with this massive sort of collar at the back and everything. There's some. The costumes match the OTT performance. You know, the huge rod with the crystal on the end, which is just like, you know, blasting everything. And the production on this, if we look back at the ones that we've just been talking about, we're back up. You know, a real leap up in pretty much everything. You know, cast, production, the look of it, the feel of it, the pace of it. I do know that some people don't like it, but for me, you know, we've had a bit of a dip, and now we're back up there with a great story.
I do remember that the first time we were sort of introduced to Michael Osborne to do an event, his friend said he doesn't remember an awful lot about it, but he had a very camp costume. I was like, if you're going to take anything away from being in the Horns of Nimon, it's the camp costume. I think it's June at her sort of most theatrical, isn't it? Everyone's got plumage or it's a look, isn't it? And it adds to it. I even like the sort of Scott said. I like the backdrop, the sort of clouds. I think that all looks quite effective. And the husks are quite creepy when they find a desiccated, you know, child, I suppose, aren't they? I think it looks good, and it doesn't have quite the same cheap aesthetic as Nightmare of Eden. It looks like they've held a bit of molar back.
It's interesting actually, because this has got a bit of a tag as being the worst Doctor Who story of all time. I don't see it myself, and I don't think it feels like none of us see it on this particular discussion that we're having. But why do you feel that it might have got that reputation? I mean, I know the comedy is a key part of this, and the acting and you know, Graham's portrayal. You know, what could give it a reason for being the worst Doctor Who of all time? Because I just don't think it fits that bill.
I think maybe the Graham portrayal. If you think about the Curse of Fatal Death, the Master. I think it's Jonathan Pryce, isn't it? The portrayal of the Master in that. I think that's a sort of hark back to this overly camp OTT villain. But I think in this story, against Tom and, you know, within the confines of this story, that works. It's not, you know, I watch it and I enjoy it. I don't think, oh my God, he's really, you know, camping it up. I just joy in his performance. I'm just like, he could go to the nth degree with it and I would still enjoy it, because he just seems to be having a whale of a time chomping his way through the scenery, and anyone who gets in his way, and fair play to him, you know. I think certain other actors, if they tried to do it, probably wouldn't work as successfully. I think, you know, the man is brilliant in this role, though.
I think there's I mean, from when I was younger, sort of mid-90s, and I used to read episode guides and things like that. They all have ratings for stories, things like that. They were always written, I think, from the point of view that if Doctor Who wasn't being 100% serious with itself and wasn't being, you know, scientifically cool or trying to impress, you know, people, I think it was then seen as bad Who. And I think there are certain things that if they aren't seen as, anything Hinchcliffe was obviously instantly amazing. I think Pertwee was all right. Anything sort of Graham Williams wasn't as good because it wasn't as serious as it was when it was with Philip Hinchcliffe. And then when you get the sort of pseudo-science with Bidmead, then that's very respectable because it's proper science fiction. It's Doctor Who being very serious. And I think a lot of that mythology translated into the guides and they translated to the scores, and people had a perception. I mean, I know growing up, I'd read things, I'd be like, oh God, this must be a terrible one, this must be a terrible one. And I think the interesting thing is now, especially the way people come to stories now, I think the whole generation now that have come through the new series, like Christopher and Dave, even Jodie sort of recently, people who are discovering these stories now are discovering them without this baggage that's sort of been round the necks for so many years, and it's a baggage that when I was younger, and if I liked the Horns of Nine, it would be seen as weird. Why? This isn't the thing. You should like this. You should. And I think a lot of those perceived baggages that are attached to these stories have gone. So people discover them, they enjoy them, and they like them, and they can like stories that were always seen as a bit bad or not as cool as the others. And I think, hopefully the Blu-ray coming out, which I think the Blu-rays are introducing a lot of these seasons to viewers for the first time. And I'd like to hope that something like Horns of Nimon will maybe get a bit of a renaissance. Maybe people will go, actually, there's a lot to admire in this, and there's a lot of colour to it, and there's a lot of energy, and it's a good Doctor Who story. And I hope, could be wrong, they might always go, what is this old Bobbins with guys in tights and horns? They might not like it at all. But I'd like to hope that actually it will give it a reappraisal, and people see that there's a lot of comedy, there's a lot of humour in the season, and some of it's possibly ill-judged or wavering on the borders of it. But the heart's there, and I think that the colour and enjoyment is, and that's much of the reason I love this season. Some of my scores haven't been like stand out. I have given the 1 10, I gave 3 10s out in season 14. I love this season so much more than season 18, because this feels like there's an adventure, there's an enjoyment, and there's a fun to doing this that is sort of just sucked out the year after, and it takes a long while before you get the fun back, and you get a sensation of a Doctor and companion having fun and having a chemistry where you're like, I'd like to join this team, I'd like to be part of this, rather than thinking, why do they even talk to each other? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, there's an ambition here. Whilst it's masked a little bit possibly with some of the production values, there is an ambition, a pure ambition in this season. And I think they were trying to stretch things. And you're right, it became too almost clinical in season 18, because you're right, they sucked a lot of the fun out of the characterizations because it needed to be played, in their view, a little bit straighter. But I think as long as you can get the balance of the comedy right and the balance of the drama right as you come through a story or a season like season 17, then I think you're onto a surefire winner. When you look back, some of the latter seasons of McCoy were not as well liked as, and now in retrospect, people actually do enjoy them. So like you, I do hope that when the season does eventually come out on Blu-ray, which is quite close, we'll introduce this story and this season, in fact, to some new people who will hopefully reevaluate it, or evaluate it for the first time, or even some existing fans who'll sit and reevaluate it, because I do think it needs it. I came to this season having rewatched it this time round, not having seen possibly 3 or 4 of these stories now for quite some time. And it's been interesting to come back and look at them. And I did think my score for Horns and Nimon would be different than it's going to end up being. But having rewatched it and having enjoyed the comedy again that I think is in this season, something as a younger fan I possibly would have dismissed, enjoying the comedy in this time round has probably been one of the enjoyable elements of rewatching for this discussion.
I also feel strangely, because sometimes stories slightly echo when they are broadcast timing wise, and this went out, it started literally sort of 3 days before Christmas and went into the new year, and it does, I don't want to say it's a panto, because I think that's actually a derogatory thing that I think is thrown at it quite a lot, but it is one that you can watch at Christmas, and it is almost sort of Christmas Doctor Who somehow. I suppose some of the narrative lends itself to that, isn't it? It's sort of the Babes in the Wood maybe, and mixed in with the mythology. There is an almost feel that it's end of term. I think Tom carving up the console set and all that stuff, I think that's very much end of term. And everyone hates the words, don't they? That and bang, they hate all that stuff. Just come on, it's fun. Come on, live a little.
It's fun. It's allowed.
It's always fun to see the rotor with the perspex off, isn't it? It's exciting. It's a different version. it's another model for someone to release. It's fine. I like that. Holds on. It does feel very much like one you can watch in that kind of December slot. It perfectly pitched for that. And equally, as much as we all know, Sharda should have followed it. Horns and Nimon has one of the most beautiful end shots. I absolutely adore the. He says there's a few millennia left in the old girl yet. It's like, I'm talking about the TARDIS. And Lalla it just rolls on that little bit longer than obviously it would have, and she just does that. It's just a beautiful, and it is a beautiful end to the season, I think. Before we have a 6-minute tracking shot of Brighton Beach next year, but I think if you didn't know that it wasn't the last story of the season, you wouldn't guess it was meant to be more, which is a shame we didn't get.
Well, it does feel like a season finale. It's got that build up, like you say, and it's got a lovely ending. I think I actually did watch. I know we're not going to talk about it today, but I watched Sharda afterwards. It was on BritBox, so it sort of went straight into playing it, and I was kind of like I'm gonna stop, but I ended up watching it. But I like the fact that this story is the end of this season. Not to take away from Sharda and what it would have been, but I think it fits in quite nicely. We sort of had a, really outstanding performance in the first two, particularly in the second one, a bit of a dip, and then we're back on, from my viewpoint, back on point.
Of course, I mean, if they'd run concurrently, we'd have had 2 stars of Waiting for God, wouldn't we, in two consecutive stories. No Janine Davitsky, sadly. Still waiting for that casting. But yes, have we any last-minute stats on Doctor and the Horns of Nimon?
Just the cryogenic pods are the same ones from Ark in Space, so just a bit of recycling there. But apart from that, we've covered everything else.
Anything from Space 1999? They reused Catherine Shell from Space 1999 in City of Death. I don't know if we mentioned that as a stato fact.
No.
No.
And this was the time, obviously we didn't get Sharda, so this became the end of the season. So, it's the last televised time that we see the diamond logo and the time tunnel, and it's the very last time we see Tom's trademark sort of coloured scarf, and, it's the last time we hear the original Delia Derbyshire theme arrangement, and obviously it's the last Graham Williams story to be televised. So quite a lot of final bits that are wrapping up in this season as we launch towards what would essentially be seen as a bit of a reboot in season 18. So yeah, final times really.
Goodbye, Dudley Simpson.
Yeah. It was, in fact, it was Dudley's last season as well.
Yeah. So, and goodbye to the 1970s. Oh, it's like ABBA, it's all Happy New Year, Happy New Year.
Oh, I'm going to have to take off my disco wig now.
Hang your disco wig up and get your Formalzi suit on. Okay, let's head to a score then. Who's going first on the Horns and Nimon?
Oh, go on then. I will go first. It is a glorious piece of camp old nonsense, and I love it.
You talking about Jason or the Horns of Nimon?
Rude.
Both.
I just said camp old nonsense. I thought Jason's scoring was about to come through.
It's not untrue, though, I don't think.
And I know there's going to be people that comment on this, and fair enough. Everybody has their own favourite stories, but I do like this. So Nimon be praised. I'm giving it a 9.
A 9-mon.
A 9-mon.
Wow, that is a great little score there. I'm not sure I can beat that, but I'll give it a good go.
9.5 or 10 would beat it.
Well, I'm certainly not going to a 10. However, it's going to be a good score on this one. I echo a lot of the what James just said. I think it is a great camp little story, and I think that rewatching it again has served to deliver me a slightly different view on it than I would have held probably 5-6 years ago, and probably longer when it was the first broadcast for me. Great cast, Graham. Well, we've said everything we need to say about him. Tom and Lalla, fabulous end scene in the TARDIS. That TARDIS set, by the way, is completely wrecked by the end of the story, it's fair to say. Great story, great humour. I love this one a lot, and I'm going to go out with a 8 for the Horns of Nimon.
What should I say?
Oh no, it's not cut back. So you have to make a noise. Make a noise and go for take 2.
So, or should that be? I love that. He doesn't blink most of the way through it. He just doesn't blink. It's just brilliant.
Okay. Right, ladies and gentlemen, the scores are on the doors for season 17. In 5th place, and tragedies, they've got him. It's rock bottom. It's Nightmare of Eden with 17.5, which would probably make it our season 18 winner, actually. Maybe we should check back on some of the scores for season 18. Probably would. In 4th place, we call it The Creature from the Pit, and that's on 19 points. 3rd place, it's Destiny of the Daleks on 22.5. Did I give my score for the Horns of Nimon?
No, you didn't.
It's like a Eurovision, isn't it, where you hold it back? I award. It's probably quite helpful now when positioning it. I gave the Horns of Nimon 9 points. I think it's a great, joyous thing. That probably added to the tension with the scores. So that means the Horns of Nimon does end up in 2nd place on 26 points.
That's a good score.
But it's unbeatable, and our season winner on 30 points, it couldn't do better, is City of Death, which I think...
Woo! And it couldn't be better. That's a great season winner. And actually, I'm really pleased to see the Horns of Nimon coming in quite up as high as it does, because I think it genuinely deserves to be there.
So we shall be back with a future video to discover our thoughts on the many wondrous forms of Sharda. But for season 17, thank you very much for watching, and thank you to Jason and to James.
Thanks very much. Nice to have been here again.
Very much. Yeah.
And it's not going to go back to James. He's not making that noise. It's not going to go back to
me. He hogs it.
He's an old hogger. Thank you guys. Like, subscribe, happy comments, and we'll see you soon.